Sidhant, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here to talk about Clearbot. I came across Clearbot after doing some research into some of the up and coming startups in the Hong Kong area. Clearbot kept on coming up on my radar. And so I wanted to reach out to you directly. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me over, Nick. Such a pleasure to be here and share a little more about what we do.
I can't wait to get into all the story of Clearbot, but I always like to first start with the story of the founder themselves, their history, and what they did before they started on their current journey with their current startup. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I grew up in India, in Bangalore, and my parents ran a manufacturing company, so I spent a lot of time around machines, and so that's how I started to get into robotics. So when I was in India, I actually ended up making a robot that broke a national record. So at the time, it was the smallest walking robot around in India, and I think that kind of reinforced to me that this was the space I wanted to be in. Right. And then I came over to Hong Kong to study at the University of Hong Kong. And there I started a project to kind of one up my previous work. I started a project to break a Guinness World Record. Right. So the idea was, so we found this record category for fastest robotic fish that we felt we could attempt and work out. So I started building this robotic fish at HQ. And as a result of that, two things happened. First is I got a lot of exposure into the marine sort of environment, right? Which of course today is all of my work now. But also I got a lot of opportunities to travel around and do projects on behalf of the university. So we would do projects in a lot of different countries, try and create products that help local communities. And in fact, that is exactly how Clearbot started off, right? So we were in Bali in Indonesia, and we kind of came across this problem and we started working on a solution. So yeah, that's kind of how I started off and how I ended up with what Clearbot is today.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about your Guinness World Record and the story behind that? And how fast was this fish?
Sure. So we basically started this project in 2016. And then we thought it's like pretty straightforward. We did the math. We should be able to do it. And so we started putting together this robotic fish, and the condition was that it needed to swim with its tail. So you can't have propellers or anything.
Okay.
So, and basically, the first 3 years was just a disaster. Right? So we kept trying to get it to go faster and faster, and then eventually we had to do a lot of research into kind of the flexibility of the fins and how we transfer the power out. And then so it took us almost 5 years to finally build a fish. The fish itself was about a meter long, so it wasn't a small product. It had a 200-watt capacity, and we did a 50-meter pool in about 23 seconds. So
Wow.
So that's about, I mean, it's comparable to Michael Phelps, right? So the original idea was, hey, we built a fish faster than a human, and then most Olympic swimmers. So yeah.
Very cool. So gold medal for that. And is it still the fastest fish, robotic fish in the world?
Yes, it is. Actually, the same team ended up breaking the record again next year with an improved version of that machine. And so it's kind of an ongoing project now at the University of Hong Kong, where on one side, they're coming up with new research every year on, how this kind of motion can actually be a really efficient way to go through the water. But also on the other side, they're getting a return in terms of breaking records, right?
Tell us about the origin story of Clearbot.
Sure. So, the story is, so the University of Hong Kong, where me and my co-founder at the time were graduating out that year of the university. So the university had a little fund that would cover your flight tickets to a far-off destination, provided you actually did a project to help the local community and, basically did something useful there. So we really wanted to go to Bali for our graduation trip, and we needed to figure out a way to afford it. And so we did the math and said, okay, if we go to Bali and find an impactful, could do an engineering project there which is impactful, potentially we could pay for our flights. So jokes apart, that's kind of how we ended up in Bali on a beach looking for a problem to solve. And we came across a lot of the locals were going out, they're going out into the water and collecting the trash out by hand. So they would go out on the surfboards or little paddle boats with nets. And what we found out is they couldn't use motorboats because the propellers would get stuck, or the trash rather would get stuck in the propellers. And so even though the government had a incentive to try and clean this water, and the local community had an incentive, but the industry depends on it. And even though there were volunteers available, there was time and money being put in, they weren't really able to scale up the collection process. And so that's when we saw this gap, right? Like, so there's an intent, but the tools aren't available to make it happen. So we prototyped the first Clearbot in Bali. It was just a couple of aluminum bars and some net, and it was like really hacker. We used like toy helicopters as the propulsion, and but it worked, right? It sort of worked, and I think we got a good response. Like people were like, hey, at least I ready to go out to the water, so not bad, something. And we kind of came out of that and came back to Hong Kong, and we realized that the government here uses these like motorized sampans, these old boats that are going up and down the harbor each day cleaning up waste. But those boats run on petrol and diesel, so they're creating pollution while trying to clean pollution, right? It's kind of a not so logical solution, I guess. So we kind of looked at it and said, okay, hey, we actually have the expertise to make this electric, so it'll be emission free. We have the expertise to semi-automate, if not fully automated, which means rather than having a crew of 2 or 3 people running one boat, you can now have one person running 3 or 4 boats, right? And so you can really scale it up. And the third is there's a monetary incentive as well, right? So this is financially sustainable because the government's paying huge amount of money, like millions of dollars every year in just one city. Just take Hong Kong, right? The government's spending a lot of money doing this. So kind of all the puzzle pieces seem to make sense, right? And so it was in September 2021, me and my co-founder started working on this full time, and we ended up set up the company. We created our first prototype, and we got a pilot with some land reclamation companies because there's a lot of marine construction happening around Hong Kong, and that's one of those commercial use cases where they really need this service, a lot of waste in their water. So that's how we started off. And basically, the last 2 years have been quite exciting. That in June 2021, we launched the current robot in the way you see it. So with partnership with Razer, the gaming company. And in the last 18 months, we've scaled from 1 boat to now having a fleet of 10 boats, right? And we're now trying to scale up in India and sort of expand out of Hong Kong as well. So that's kind of our story.
Amazing. With regard to the different problems that you're solving, so you've got a pollution solution, and then there's other aspects to the services that you provide. I saw that there was surveillance, monitoring, there was cargo, and then I think you also mentioned as well about inspection of marine infrastructures, let's say like oil rigs, I believe was mentioned on your site. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about the problem spaces around those as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what happened is as we started, pretty much putting out boats and cleaning up stuff, we realized 2 things. Number one is that we aren't the only solution to cleaning up waste out of water. And we aren't necessarily the most efficient. So we're really efficient at harbor shorelines, these sort of areas. But for example, if you have a river with no traffic, it's just cheaper and faster to just block it, like put a barrier across the top. So we fit into what is a portfolio of solutions that could make a difference to the trash problem. And we have a very particular space in harbor shorelines or rivers where there's a lot of traffic. So as we started doing this work, we realized, hey, we have to think outside just doing this, right? Number one. And number two is our clients started reaching out to us and saying, hey, I also have, you're already going out of the platform and cleaning out waste. Why don't you inspect it for me as well? Or, I'm already using you for X. Can you do something? Can you move some codes, or can you do oil removal and so on? And what we realized is, from an impact angle, those were all use cases where, again, there was a petrol or diesel fired machine being used to do that work. And so our clients were really happy because they were saving money and they were lowering their emission output while getting the same work done with our machine. And so slowly we started expanding. And so now we're doing pollution recovery, which is trash, oil, invasive vegetation. We're doing goods deliveries, which is after 200 kilos refrigerated or non-refrigerated goods. And the third is inspections. So that's water quality monitoring or visual inspections or seabed mapping. You basically put sensors on and send the boat out.
When you are the most appropriate solution, why do you edge out the competitors?
That's a good question. Okay, so let's look at what the competitors are. Right? That'll give us a good idea. So number one is have a trash boom. So that's just blocking the surface. That's actually probably one of the most efficient ways to just stop floating waste from getting out into the oceans. The problem is a lot of the rivers are actually traffic. They have traffic going up and down. So people use them for transportation or moving goods, and so you can't really just block the river, right? And that creates problem number one. And so it's places like that where our machine can actually go out and pick up waste. And that's why the government is using these old boats to try and do that, right? The second kind of solution is you use a fixed bin. So there's, for example, Sea Bin is another company. And they're a pretty cool product. It's a sitting bin and it's constantly kind of just sucking in waste, right? And that works really well in, for example, a marina where there's a lot of still water. You could, like, and most of the trash is accumulating. But again, they have two problems. Number one is if you have a bit of waves or even if you're in a slightly open space, basically it doesn't work. And if the tide is against you, the waste will just get pushed away somewhere else and not come anywhere near your bin. So then you need someone to go and collect the waste, right? And finally, you look at places like just open water or like harbors, or now we're doing marinas, or shorelines, beaches. It's really hard to just go out and collect waste into the water. Nobody else can do that apart from actually having a boat or someone pick that up. So again, what we're able to do is then do that very cheaply because the operational cost of our machine is mostly just electricity, which is very, very cheap compared to burning petrol. It's emission free, it's much cleaner, and it's a lot more scalable. So you can have a one-person crew running 4 or 5 boats, out of one location, and therefore cover a very large area with very low expense and very low effort.
The current solution that you're providing, you've got a fleet of 10 vehicles or boats out there right now. What does that look like and how does it operate? What's the kind of secret sauce that's going on in the background?
It's not very complex. I mean, it's basically a self-driving boat, in fact, to simplify it. What we do is we are able to, so you can drive these boats with a radio controller. So in fact, some of our boats, it's just an operator goes to site, literally drives it around by hand. And then we have a self-driving system on top. So you can sit in the office, turn on the robot, it'll show up on your map. The GPS location will show up on the map, and you can say, okay, this is the area I want you to clean up. And it'll kind of go zigzag on its own and clean up where it does. It also has object avoidance systems on board. So if there's any other boat that, let's say, comes in its way or there's an obstacle, it'll actually stop, wait for that to move, continue on its path. It allows it to be a bit safer. It won't just crash into something, right? And it also has an onboard camera stream. So if you're an operator and you're sitting, let's say, 50 miles away from the boat, it's fine. You can watch the live stream and you'll always know kind of where it's at, what's going on. And if it ever disconnects or if it gets full, the boat will actually come back to its starting point. And so at the moment, the sort of constraint in our operations is that somebody still parks the boat by hand. So somebody moors it to dock by hand. But we're actually creating out a docking station that should be ready by late March for trials. That will allow us to truly run these remotely, and you don't even need that one person inside anymore.
If I'm an operator sitting back in a HQ somewhere and we've set it to automatic to clean up this rubbish in an automatic manner, can I take control at any point that I want to, pick up some pieces that have been missed? Yes. Or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's on our dashboard, there's literally 2 buttons that says manual and automatic. So you want to shift back to manual, you press manual, and using your keyboard or an Xbox controller, you can just, do it. So it's super easy.
How have you trained the algorithm to be able to identify pieces of trash versus, I don't know, maybe organic sea material or sea life that you don't want to be collecting and you want to leave that? And how do you avoid false positives?
That's a great question. Let's lay this down, right? So number one, a lot of sea creatures, most of sea creatures, we don't really need to worry about because their natural reaction is to run away from any kind of vibration. That's how they protect themselves in the natural environment. So that's why you never hear fish going near both. In fact, when you go fishing, you have to be super silent. So most marine life is anywhere away from us. Number two is we operate in really, really, don't mind me saying, crappy water, right? So bad that usually nothing really wants to live there as well. So that also solves one part. And the third part is actually the active component, which is our machine learning. So we do have some creatures. For example, in vegetation cleaning projects, we'll see ducks. A lot of these areas have like ducks, so they're pretty stubborn, even if the boat's coming at them. So in that case, your machine learning, our camera at the front kind of detect, oh, this is a duck, and stop, and wait for the duck to go by before it starts going again. And we can actually train this model for pretty much any kind of animal. So one that we had to train for recently is jellyfish. It was actually a bit tough because a white jellyfish under the water or on the water surface looks really similar to a plastic bag on the water surfaces, right? So so it has its own challenges, but generally we have not really collected to date any at least a live marine creature. We do have some sites where they're so dirty they have dead fish, something like. But yeah, well, in general, the machine learning systems take care of that.
And then with respect to the surveillance aspect of your service or to the cargo moving or delivery, is there a machine learning element to that as well? Is there an automated element to that as well? Or is that all done manually by controllers back in an office somewhere?
It can again be done completely automated. So the self-driving system is the same, right? Irrespective of whether you're collecting trash or whether you're doing an inspection or whether you're moving goods. It's a self-driving boat that all you do is swap in. In the case of collecting waste, it's a conveyor belt and a holding cage. In the case of cargo, it's just a holding area. In the case of inspections, it's an inspection unit or a sensor unit. But effectively, the system itself remains the same. And what might vary is, of course, how the client or how the user might want to use it, right? So especially with waste collection, resources are low and demand is high. So you prefer using self-driving mode. For inspections, you might want a lot more accuracy, and so people might want to drive it manually or drive it very slowly, right? So the user requirements change, but for us, what we're trying to do is have a single product that's really scalable, and eventually that's more value to our clients as well. So if someone's picking us up for waste cleaning, and then they realize that, oh, this waste cleaning board can be used for like 5 other things, that incentivizes them to pick up the machine and start adopting the solution as well, right? So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your clients. You've got a number of boats out there at the moment, and I'm guessing that they're being used by not all one client or one customer, but a number of different clients and customers. Can you talk to us a little bit about the kinds of clients and customers that you currently have?
Sure. So we do a lot of work with the government, the various government departments. So sewage department, marine department, environmental protection department, and so on. And even we have a project, for example, with the highways department in Hong Kong. So they're constructing a bridge over a river, and and then the site gets really smelly because the river is carrying so much waste underneath, right? And they have to keep cleaning it up. So they're using us in order to do that. And so in Hong Kong, we're working with a lot of government departments. Now we're expanding to India, where again, it's a lot of government, or if not government, it's a lot of contractors who take a government tender and that sort of subcontracting down to us. So in that sense, that's the major chunk of our business. And then we also have 1 or 2 boats that are with some brands, right? So these are private clients who they want to do a CSR project, or they have a factory and the water that's dirty, and they want to do a bit of branding as well as a bit of cleanup for their community. So they'll sponsor a boat, and we're also doing those projects. But eventually, what we're trying to do is, we'll use those as opportunities to get the local government in that area to then pick up the project as a kind of free demo. So eventually, yeah. So even if we do have some private clients, property companies, and so marine construction companies, but the vast majority of it is definitely public sector.
How much is a typical customer or government agency paying to use the service and the product?
Sure. So the model is pretty simple. It's that we rent these boats out, or rather we rent the service out. But the reason is that, so we initially started off trying to sell this boat, right? And we did actually sell like the first 2 units, but what we realized very quickly is 2 things. Number one, the client may not have the expertise to maintain it, to be honest. It's a relatively new product, robotics, you need a bit of technical skill, which is something we're trying to reduce now by at least with our first machines. or they're more difficult to maintain. And so the client may not have the capability to maintain it, in which case they have a bad experience. And then the second issue is that, from our side as well, it's just lower revenue, right? Because you're selling that machine one time, you then pay to make all the upgrades and so on. So it kind of doesn't make sense. Our clients might be more averse to buying an asset as opposed to buying a service, because now with that asset it goes on the balance sheet and the depreciation and whatnot. So what we realize a much better model for everybody here is that we rent the machine out. So although we take the cost on us for building the machine, the advantage is, number one, our revenue is much longer. Machines, it's almost like a SaaS, hardware as a service, SaaS, right? So we're able to actually get a much better return on building that machine. Number two is the client's usually already paying for this on a monthly basis to somebody else, right? To a manual-based contractor, the guy with a boat and a petrol engine, right? And so to shift over to us is a very easy choice because they're also paying us monthly now, right? So it's very natural. They're just shifting my contractor as opposed to restructuring my costs, right? So it's more complex. So it's just simply moving the bid to me, and I'm able to give them a better service with much lower operating expense, because I'm not cheaper than the competition to sell the boat, but I'm much cheaper than the competition when we're renting the boat out, because I'm only using electricity and very low manpower as a fuel and a lot of people. So it seems to be a very win-win relationship. It's this kind of rental model, right, where we offer the service because we get to control the client experience. Happy, we maintain the boats, we can offer upgrades. So we are upgrading our own fleet, so it's win for us if we give them an upgrade. And their cost is relatively low. They don't really have to invest to try our product. They can just pay a few months to try it. So it's kind of a win-win relationship. And the pricing kind of really varies depending on region, length of project. So, we have projects as little as $1,500 a month, right, for a full month of service. And then we have projects as much as $10,000 a month for a month of service. And the reason the range is so crazy, it's almost 10x, is because some projects will only be there for 1 or 2 months. In fact, some projects will be there for just 1 week, and they want to clean up huge area in a week, let's say. Versus some projects will have 3 years contract, right? So it's very cheap. Set up the boat there and just keep it running for 3 years. And so we can offer a much lower price. And also the size of the boat or the number of boats or the variety of tasks that a boat must do can change. And the kind of water can change. So installing a machine in a river versus in open water, in Hong Kong you have typhoons. So if you want the boat to sit around in a typhoon, then reinforce the boat, so it costs me more to do that. And so we kind of look at each project, we work with the client, say, okay, what are your requirements? And then we'll come up with we'll take our cost, split it over the total project period and say, okay, this is what we can offer you.
How do you go to the market now to acquire more clients? Are you just going to government agencies, or are you reaching out to those private contractors like you said? What are you doing to acquire new customers?
Sure. The answer is it's a mix of both in terms of the client type, right? We're not targeting, again, eventually it's all government, but we're quite open to working with different levels of, we're too small right now for us to kind of really choose, to be honest. And in terms of how we're reaching out to people, to be honest, we've been very lucky because thanks to jokes about podcasts like this, we got a lot of exposure, right? And what happens is usually people reach out to us. So for example, right now we have a pipeline of, let's say, 30, 25 orders. And I don't have machines, or I don't have the capability to maybe deliver an order that size. So for the moment, and we're very lucky to be in this position, but for the moment, the constraint is actually the product and not the sales. So demand has been incoming. People find us on Google, people like literally reach out to us, or they read about us in the paper and they're like, okay, I need a product. And the challenge for us has been scaling up. So we went from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10 in 18 months. Now we're trying to figure out how to go from 10 to 100, and that's a whole different scaling challenge, right? So what's working for 10 votes won't work necessarily for 100 votes. And so we're having to kind of rethink our product and operation process to kind of make it scale to the next level.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? I'm sure there's going to be other founders out there who are looking to build in the hardware space and possibly even the robotic space. What is so challenging about moving from that, fleet of 10 to that fleet of 100? What do you have to think about differently?
That's a great question. This has been the last 3 months of my life, but basically, so when our fleet of 10 boats, between you and me, if something goes wrong, it's easy for us to fix. because we have only 10 boats. And so you can have an operation team of just 2 people and it's okay. Like you just go out, fix the boat, come back. And so that way the boats are constantly running and then the operations works, things are fine. But when you have 100 boats, and where, for example, now we're expanding to India, where those boats are going to be 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers away from each other, as opposed to Hong Kong, where it's like, get on the train, the 40 minutes you can be to where the boat is, right? And so with 100 boats, what we need is we need a machine that's a lot more reliable. We need a machine that, survives a much larger variety of conditions. We need a machine that can be maintained by external partners rather than just by our team. So it needs to be super down, sort of idiot-proof, so to speak, right? Where you can't really mess it up. It's designed in a way that it's intuitive to use, it's intuitive to maintain. There's a lot of other issues. Can it fit into a standard shipping container? Does it have license requirements? Because now with 100 boats, it's not just one region. So we need to be licensable in 5 different regions. So we need to fit some international standards. And so I think and even in terms of operations, as I was saying, today somebody is parking this boat by hand. That simple task doesn't scale. You can do it with 10. It just doesn't scale when you have to do 100. Because you can't have, people running around just parking 100 boats every day. Like, that doesn't make sense. You need to have some level of automation. And so I think it's that there is a process, and this process kind of works today, right? There's a lot of gaps in this process, or there's a lot of failure points within this process. And today we're able to go through them because your volume is small at 10 volts. But when you scale up, you then have to make the process more efficient. And that's across companies. I mean, hardware, software. This is the challenge at scaling. Right? Things to scale, they actually have to work at 10x. They have to work smoothly, and you have to remove all the points of failure, or at least more points of failure, to get to the next stage.
Have you found a manufacturing partner to start that manufacturing of this order for 100 boats?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually, you just got a bit of my story. My family was into manufacturing in India. I grew up a lot around a factory. So we happen to know, coincidentally, a lot of manufacturers in India, right? And so we were actually producing the boat in China, and then, of course, with COVID, supply chain issues, things became quite hard. And then we started looking at India as a geography to sell as well. And so what we've done now is we've actually partnered with a number of suppliers and factories in India. And we've in fact already assembled our first boat entirely out of India, and shipped to a client. And so going forward, we're going to be producing a machine there. And so we have now the capacity to actually, if we need to get to 100 boats, we're able to deliver that, at least with the current. So yeah.
Building hardware isn't cheap. I know that you've recently raised quite a bit of money. Can you tell us a little bit about that raising experience, and what you're looking to put that money towards?
Sure. In terms of the raising experience, as every founder in the world will probably tell you, it was terrible. It was just most horrible thing. It takes your time away from the business. You just have to argue with VCs who think, they own the world. So it's not necessarily fun, but you need to do it. And I think, so for us, the story was, as I said, we were going from 1 to 10 at the time, right? And so suddenly we had all these orders, and then we were able to produce all these boats. So but the catch was we didn't have the money to produce all these boats. So initially we started looking at this as just like working capital. Say, hey, we need working capital. The bank wasn't giving us a loan because, we had a year of operations with one boat, right? So they were like, hey, we need to see some better financials before we get money. And the orders are nice, but they don't reflect it. Like, we look at past performance. So it was kind of a difficult situation. And so we said, okay, 2 things. We desperately need to raise money to fulfill our current orders. Our debt is very, very hard to get right now. So if we look at equity, the advantage is not only do we have cash flow for funding these 10 boats, but our payback period on those boats was, let's say, 4 to 5 months. So 5 months later, we'll then have that money coming back to us, which can then be invested into R&D, right? So kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And in terms of R&D, because we figured out the same thing, which is figured out that once these 10 boats are paid for, which is the case today, then we want to figure out how to go from 10 to 100. And we need the R&D fund to redesign the boat to get all of that right. So it was kind of a strategic idea saying, okay, it solves the working capital problem first, which is a hardware business problem. It institutionalizes us, which makes it easier to get debt in the future, right? Because we have like institutional investors, trust to work on. And then finally, once the money is back, which is the case today, now we can reinvest it into R&D to creating something significantly better for the industry. And hopefully let's scale that up in terms of numbers.
That money was used largely for R&D and to build get these new 10 boats built, but then you're talking about building 100 boats. Does that say that you're going to be going to the markets again and to VCs again to look to raise more capital for that manufacturing?
So for that manufacturing, we are trying to avoid diluting the company. And as a founder, but the equity is your equity, right? So what we're trying to do now is, because we're very lucky to have good investors now on our cap table. We're not trying to use debt to fund the new boats because we can pay that back, right? We have orders that they reputed clients, government, none of that's an issue. So what we're trying to do now is for the upcoming, if we're trying to build 100 boats over the next 2.5 years, for that we'll likely use debt to buy the boat. And then as soon as the project starts paying off, then buy the next batch, right? As opposed to trying to raise the whole money. But we should, nonetheless, if we're able to get anything close to that figure of 100 boats, we should be raising again in 2.5 years, so that we can then scale up from 10, 100 to 1,000 of it, whatever that looks like.
You're looking at scaling up your fleet. Are you also looking at scaling up your team?
Yes, absolutely. We have grown from, at one point, just 2 of us to then 4 of us, 6 of us, and with the last one is we're now at 12 of us, the team. So we are absolutely looking to grow the team. We should be up to 14 or 15 people by next year. So that is also exciting. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, as our operations grow, fingers crossed, we're able to get great people to be.
For anybody who's watching this and they're excited about what Clearbot is doing, what are the kinds of roles that you're looking to hire for if somebody was interested?
Sure. We're looking for, well, first and foremost, always engineers. So tech, deep tech sort of firm. If you're an engineer in mechanical engineering, electronics, software, any kind of software, machine learning, or just consumers or building dashboards and APIs, we need that too, right? So that if you're a researcher in autonomous systems, we're looking to hire for that. On the electronic side, it's a lot of PCB design, manufacturing, reliability, engineering, and on the mechanical side, it's boat design, marine engineering, building out mechanical systems, self-docking, charging systems, all of that we're hiring. And finally, on the business side, we're hiring out in India we're in engineering as well, but actually for growing our business depth, so for sales reps and business development managers.
That's potentially a lot of headcount growth. How many people do you think might be in the business by, this time next year?
Oh, well, it's not going to be that much. Probably 15 or 16. So we're going to hire 4 or 5.
Are there any other plans on the roadmap, expansion into other services, any new products that you're looking to build as well?
So actually what we're trying to do is increase the size and capability of our current product. So for example, with waste collection or vegetation removal, is the same machine, pollution recovery machine. We're now building a version that's going to be basically 1.6, 1.7 times the size, right? With an efficiency ratio, so our current boat has an efficiency of only about 35%, which means the space on the boat available for storage of garbage is only about 35% of the size of it. So it's really low. So the new boat should have an efficiency ratio of 80%. So effectively, it's 80% and it's a lot bigger. So it should be a huge, so almost 2 to 3x increase on the net size collection. And so we're trying to create a much bigger machine, which will be the one that we're going to scale from 10 to 100. That will also then allow us to do a new kind of water for cargo and for inspections. And what we're really trying to do is not necessarily expand use cases, but then double down on the existing use cases to get more orders in vegetation removal, trash removal, in goods deliveries and inspections with a better product.
That's very interesting. So it sounds really like you're looking to build out a much more robust and multi-use case platform, as opposed to going and segmenting or going deep into one particular pillar of your services. Is that fair?
Sort of, yeah. Because, well, I mean, to be totally honest, we're already kind of deep into waste collection. Like that, if I had like 80% of my business comes from removing either garbage or vegetation from the water. So we're kind of doubling down on that. We're creating a much better product for that. But while we're doing that, we're creating a design that is, so the old boat was designed to only do that, and really everything else was just like somehow fit on top, right? But the new boat is going to be designed rather, is completely modular, right? So even though business-wise, definitely most of the business is still coming from waste collection, at least from a product side, if we want to move the products modular enough to then do any of the other use cases, to actually expand our capabilities.
I want to just touch base with you on if there's any sort of call to action that you're looking for any particular audience members to take if they're watching this.
Absolutely, Nick. So I think, if you see your company potentially partnering with us or being able to do a project with us, or frankly, if you see dirty water out in your community, do send me an email. It's sid@clearbot.org. Let us know because, well, for starters, if you have a company, that's great. Then we can work out, if we can see if we can work with you guys. But if you just have dirty water in your community, we often get sponsors who are looking to clean up water somewhere, right? And so it's an opportunity for us to get a put it in your community. So if you have that interest, just reach out to me.
Excellent. Sidhant, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat to me today. I think that what you're doing with Clearbot is incredibly important. We all want to take care of our waterways, our seas, our oceans, and what you're doing, I think, really, contributes to addressing the preservation of those spaces. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to see what happens next, where this further investment brings you. Can't wait to see the rollout of the 100 new boats for the big fleet that's going to be coming down the line, and your global expansion as well. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure.